it's Ian. Settle in and get cozy. Tonight, we begin a gentle fan-made tale set after the events of Howl's moving castle. In part 1, Sophie is trying to have an ordinary morning, never simple in a walking castle, when a black invitation arrives. The Witch of the Waste is throwing a Halloween gala, and attendance appears non-optional. Expect humming marigolds, very opinionated costumes, and Howl being, well, Howl. I'll read at an easy, unhurried pace so you can drift off whenever you're ready. If sleep takes you, that's perfect. Just start again tomorrow from where you remember. Now, breathe out, loosen your shoulders, and let's step quietly into market chipping. Chapter 1, in which Sophie receives an unwelcome invitation. Sophie Pendragon was having a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning, which should have been her first warning that something was about to go wrong. In her experience, ordinary mornings in a castle that walked on chicken legs and occasionally rearranged its own rooms for entertainment were about as common as sensible behavior from her husband, which is to say, theoretical at best. She was in the flower shop, her flower shop now, though she still thought of it as belonging to the castle, even after 3 years of running it. The shop existed in a peculiar state of being both part of the castle and separate from it, connected by a door that sometimes led to the castle's main room, and sometimes led to a dimension full of singing roses, depending on the castle's mood. This morning, the door was behaving itself, and Sophie could hear the familiar sounds of domestic chaos from the castle proper. Howl arguing with the bathroom mirror about whether cerulean or azure better complemented his complexion. Calcifer grumbling about the quality of the logs. Too damp, not enough magical resonance, and why did Morgan keep trying to paint them purple? And Morgan himself, their 3-year-old son, enthusiastically narrating his breakfast to anyone who would listen. The egg is trying to escape. Morgan's voice carried through the door. But I will eat it with fire. No fire at the breakfast table, she heard Michael say wearily. Michael was 19 now, officially Howl's apprentice, and unofficially the person who prevented Morgan from burning down the castle when Sophie was in the shop and Howl was having a hair crisis. Sophie smiled and returned to her marigolds. They were particularly lovely this year, a deep orange that reminded her of autumn sunsets. She was arranging them in a vase, humming quietly, when she noticed something odd. The marigolds were humming back. "Oh no," she said firmly. "We are not doing magical flowers. I specifically chose you because you were ordinary." The marigolds continued humming, now in 3-part harmony. Before Sophie could investigate further, the shop bell jangled with the particular discord that meant magical visitor rather than customer. She looked up to see Martha, her younger sister, burst through the door with her cheeks pink from the October cold and her eyes wide with alarm. "Sophie, have you seen this?" Martha waved a black envelope in the air like a flag of surrender. "If it's another bill from Howl's tailor, I'm not looking at it," Sophie said firmly. "Last month's total could have bought a small house, a nice small house, with non-humming flowers." "Your flowers are humming?" Martha asked, momentarily distracted. "Never mind that. What's the envelope?" "It's not a bill." Martha thrust the envelope at her. "It's worse." Sophie took the envelope, which was made of expensive black paper that felt unpleasantly warm to the touch. The seal showed a pumpkin with a rather unpleasant grin, pressed in orange wax that seemed to flicker like firelight As soon as her fingers touched it, the envelope grew uncomfortably warm and burst open on its own, releasing a small puff of smoke that smelled of cinnamon, dead leaves, and something else, something that made her think of power left to ferment too long. The letter inside wrote itself across the air in glowing orange letters that hurt to look at directly. The Witch of the Waste cordially demands your presence at her All Hallows Eve gala. Costume mandatory, curses optional but encouraged. This Saturday, midnight, the old castle ruins, market chipping. P.S. Howl is especially invited. Tell him resistance is futile, and his hair won't save him this time. P.P.S. Sophie dear, do bring that interesting fire demon. I have questions. The glowing words hung in the air for a moment longer, then exploded into a shower of tiny paper bats that fluttered around the shop before dissolving into smoke that smelled distinctly of sulfur and disappointment. She's supposed to be reformed, Martha said weakly, brushing dissolved bat from her shoulder. She's also supposed to be living quietly in the country, not throwing parties in cursed ruins. Sophie examined the envelope, which was already crumbling to ash. How did you get one? Everyone's gotten one. Michael says the whole town woke up to these things sliding under their doors. Even Mrs. Penstemmon's old cat got one, though I can't imagine what costume a cat would wear. Mrs. Penstemon has a cat? Sophie asked, then shook her head. Never mind. More importantly, the witch is throwing a mandatory party. That's what it seems like. Letty's already at the market, trying to find costume supplies. Ben's convinced it's some sort of trap. Ben Sullivan, now Letty's husband, and the royal wizard, since Mrs. Penstemmon's retirement, had a tendency toward paranoia that was usually unfounded, but occasionally life-saving. If he thought it was a trap, it probably was. The question was what kind. Sophie groaned and sat down heavily on her stool behind the counter. The Witch of the Waste had indeed been reformed, mostly, after the business with her heart and the fire demon, and nearly destroying the kingdom. These days, she lived in a cottage outside market chipping, supposedly growing prize-winning vegetables and only occasionally turning people into interesting shapes when they annoyed her. The last Sophie had heard, the witch had won first place at the harvest festival for her pumpkins, which were the size of carriages, and allegedly sang opera when the moon was full. She'd seemed content, even happy, puttering around her garden, and only terrorizing the occasional traveling salesman who interrupted her gardening. But All Hallows Eve was tomorrow night, and everyone knew that was when reformed witches were most likely to relapse. It was something about the thinning of the veil between worlds that made even the most rehabilitated magical practitioner want to cackle maniacally and turn things into other things. We could just not go, Sophie suggested hopefully, though she knew it was futile. Martha gave her a look that managed to convey both sympathy and resignation. The invitation said demands, not requests. Remember what happened to the mayor when he didn't attend her garden party? Sophie did remember. The mayor had spent 3 weeks as an ornamental fountain in the town square, spurting water in decorative arcs whenever anyone walked past. He'd been rescued eventually, but he still occasionally leaked when he got nervous, and he couldn't pass a garden fountain without shuddering. That was different, Sophie said, though without much conviction. She'd specifically invited him to judge her vegetable competition, and he'd sent a polite refusal claiming a prior engagement, which turned out to be a fishing trip. She turned him into a fountain that attracted fish, Martha pointed out. They kept jumping into his mouth. He's still traumatized. The shop bell jangled again, this time playing a elaborate 12-note fanfare that meant Howl had been tinkering with it again. The door swept open dramatically. Howl had never met a door he couldn't make dramatic. And the wizard himself entered, his hair currently a fetching shade of midnight blue that seemed to contain actual stars. He was wearing his silver-starred cloak, the one that had cost more than most people's houses, and holding his own black envelope between two fingers as if it might bite. "Sophie, my darling, my heart, my anchor in these troubled times," he began, which meant he wanted something. Usually, this particular combination of endearments meant he'd done something expensive, dangerous, or both. "What did you do?" Sophie asked automatically. "Why do you assume I've done something?" "You're using your 'I've done something' voice." "I have different voices?" "You have at least 17 different voices, and that's just for apologizing." Howl looked mildly offended, but rallied quickly. "I haven't done anything yet, but the witch says my hair won't save me. My hair, as if my hair has ever needed to save me from anything, except that time with the—" "We don't talk about the sentient hairbrush incident," Howl said quickly. "That was a mutual misunderstanding between myself and an overly ambitious styling tool. It held you hostage for 6 hours. It was expressing its artistic vision. I was merely an unwilling canvas." Howl shook his head, making his starry hair ripple dramatically. "The point is, she's clearly planning something. No one throws a party in cursed ruins unless they're planning something wicked. Or unless they got a good deal on the venue." Calcifer's voice piped up from the fireplace in the corner, where Sophie had installed a small hearth for him to visit during shop hours. It was connected to the main castle fireplace by a complicated series of magical channels that Howl had spent 3 weeks perfecting, mostly because he couldn't stand the thought of Calcifer missing out on shop gossip. Cursed ruins probably rent cheap. "Calcifer, you're a fire demon. You should understand the theatrical importance of location." Howl draped himself dramatically across the counter, careful not to disturb his hair or his cloak, both of which required careful positioning to achieve maximum effect. "She's up to something, and she specifically wants me there to witness it." "She wants everyone there," Sophie pointed out, trying to be reasonable. "Even Mrs. Penstemmon's cat." "Yes, but she mentioned me by name, and my hair." Howl straightened up, his green eyes gleaming with the particular light that meant he was about to do something inadvisable. It was the same look he'd had before he'd decided to date the entire kingdom's worth of girls simultaneously, or when he'd thought giving the castle consciousness was a good idea. "We're going, of course." "We are." Sophie knew resistance was futile, but she felt obligated to try. "Obviously, I'll need at least 3 costume changes. You'll need something sensible but elegant. Perhaps a Victorian ghost. No, too predictable. A vengeful fairy queen. Better, but still not quite right." He began pacing, his cloak swirling dramatically with each turn. The shop suddenly felt smaller, as it always did when Howl was having ideas. "I don't need a costume," Sophie protested. "I could just go as myself." Howl stopped mid-pace and stared at her in horror. "Go as yourself? To a mandatory magical party thrown by the Witch of the Waste?" "Sophie, she turned the mayor into a fountain for missing her garden party. Imagine what she'd do for incorrect costume etiquette. Turn me into a sensible piece of furniture." "This isn't a joke." But Howl was fighting a smile. Besides, you'd make a terrible piece of furniture. Far too opinionated. Furniture can't have opinions. You've met our castle. It has opinions about everything, especially bathroom colors. This was true. Last week, the castle had decided the bathroom should be mint green and had sulked for 3 days when Sophie painted it back to white. Sophie recognized a lost cause when she saw one. When Howl got that look, there was no stopping him. Besides, someone responsible would need to attend to make sure he didn't accept any cursed drinks, dance with any suspicious shadows, or make any deals involving his hair, his heart, or any other body parts he was particularly attached to. "Fine," she said, "but if I end up turned into anything with more than 4 legs, you're sleeping in the garden for a month." "My darling Sophie, when have I ever let you get turned into anything?" Howl asked, looking wounded. "Tuesday," Sophie, Martha, and Calcifer said in unison. "That was barely a transformation. You were only a teapot for an hour." "A very nice teapot," Calcifer added helpfully. "Wedgwood, I think, with little blue flowers." "I couldn't pour properly," Sophie said. "My spout was crooked." "Your spout was artistic," Howl corrected. "Asymmetry is very fashionable." "In teapots?" "In everything. Haven't you noticed my new hairstyle?" He turned his head to show that his midnight blue hair was indeed styled asymmetrically, with stars clustered more on the left side. Sophie threw a marigold at him. It continued humming all the way through its arc and landed in his hair, where it nestled among the stars, and actually looked quite nice, which was annoying. "Your flowers are humming," Howl observed. "Yes, and it's your fault somehow." "How is it my fault?" "Everything magical that goes wrong is your fault. It's in our marriage contract." "We don't have a marriage contract." "We should." Item 1. All magical mishaps are Howl's fault. Item 2. See Item 1. Martha, who had been watching this exchange with amusement, cleared her throat. "While you two are discussing contracts, the rest of us need to figure out costumes. The party is tomorrow night." "Tomorrow?" Sophie hadn't realized it was so soon, but that's barely any time to prepare. "Hence why I'm panicking," Martha said. "Letty's already commissioned a seamstress. Ben's trying to enchant a suit of armor to walk by itself so he can go as a haunted knight." "That never works properly," Howl said dismissively. "The armor always develops opinions about where it wants to walk. I tried it once and ended up chasing a suit of armor through 3 kingdoms. It wanted to visit its ancestral armory." "Armor has ancestry?" Martha asked. "Everything has ancestry if you go back far enough. That particular armor was descended from a very prestigious line of tournament plate. It was insufferable about it." The shop bell jangled again, this time playing what sounded like a funeral dirge that had been remixed into a waltz. Michael stumbled in, looking frazzled. Half of him appeared to be made of starlight, which was new. "Michael, why are you partially stellar?" Sophie asked. "Spell went wrong. I was trying to create a constellation map for navigation, and I accidentally merged with it. The left half of me is currently showing the position of stars over the northern kingdoms." He demonstrated by holding up his left arm, which indeed showed twinkling stars in accurate astronomical positions. But that's not important right now. The witch's invitations are doing something weird. "Weirder than exploding into bats?" Martha asked. "Much weirder. Recruiting. Recruiting? Sophie, Howl, and Martha said together. Michael nodded, stars twinkling with his movement. People who said they wouldn't go are finding themselves mysteriously acquiring costumes. Mrs. Henderson woke up this morning to find a witch's hat on her head that won't come off. Mr. Thompson's grown donkey ears. And the bakery. He paused dramatically, which he'd learned from Howl. The bakery's gingerbread men have become sentient and are forming a chorus line. A chorus line? Sophie asked faintly. They're currently practicing kicks. In unison. It's actually quite impressive. Howl's eyes lit up with interest. Sentient gingerbread. That's advanced magic. The witch has definitely improved her skills. Or she's been planning this for months, Sophie said. How long does it take to plan a party that forces an entire town to attend? Depends on the town, Howl said thoughtfully. Market shipping is fairly magical already, so probably not that long. A few weeks of preparation, maybe a month for the really complex spells. She's been reformed for 3 years, Martha pointed out. Why now? Nobody had an answer for that. The rest of the day passed in a blur of increasingly bizarre reports. Prince Justin sent a message saying his entire guard had developed an irresistible urge to practice dance steps. The town council reported that the town hall had spontaneously decorated itself with cobwebs that spelled out, "See you soon," in spider silk. Even the church bells were affected, ringing out tunes that sounded suspiciously like party music. By evening, Sophie had given up any pretense of normalcy and was sitting in the castle's main room, watching Howl parade through costume option number 17. What about this? He was currently dressed as the king of the night sky, complete with a cape made of actual darkness and a crown of crystallized moonlight. Where did you even get crystallized moonlight? Sophie asked. I've been saving it for a special occasion. Do you think it's too much? Howl, you're wearing solid darkness. Everything about this is too much. Perfect! Too much is exactly the right amount for a witch's party. He spun, making the darkness cape ripple like water. Now, for your costume. I am not wearing crystallized anything, Sophie said firmly, but I have this lovely star silk dress. No, it only exists partially in this dimension. Definitely no. You're no fun, Howl pouted, but he was already pulling out option 18. Morgan toddled in, dragging his favorite blanket and looking mutinous. Mama, the bathroom tried to eat me. Sophie sighed. What do you mean, tried to eat you? I went for a bath and the tub grew teeth. They all looked at Calcifer, who flickered innocently. Don't look at me. I don't do plumbing. Sophie went to investigate and found that the bathtub had indeed grown teeth, though they appeared to be made of soap bubbles. It was grinning at her. This is the witch's magic, she said. It's affecting everything, even our castle. Or the castle's excited about the party, Howl suggested, joining her. It does like social events. The bathtub chomped enthusiastically, supporting this theory. Right, Sophie said, in the tone that meant she'd had enough. Castle, if you're listening, no eating people, no growing teeth, and definitely no developing opinions about party costumes. The castle creaked in what might have been agreement, or might have been laughter. With the castle, it was hard to tell. That night, as Sophie lay in bed, listening to Howl mutter about costume accessories in his sleep. She wondered what the witch was really planning. The forced invitation, the magical compulsion, the way the magic was spreading through the town like a cheerful infection. It all pointed to something bigger than just a party. But what? Outside, market chipping prepared for All Hallows' Eve in a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Costumes appeared on doorsteps. Pumpkins carved themselves. The very air seemed to thicken with anticipation and just a hint of dread. And in her cottage on the hill, the Witch of the Waste stood at her window, young and beautiful and terrible, watching the town transform with a smile that would have worried anyone who saw it. 3 years, she said to no one in particular, or perhaps to something that no one could see. 3 years of watching them all at their harvest festivals and market days, their little celebrations I'm never quite invited to. Always reformed, but never really forgiven. Well, if they won't invite me willingly, I'll make my own invitation. One they can't refuse. She looked at the calendar on her wall, where she'd circled this date months ago. The anniversary. 3 years exactly since she'd lost her powers and been taken in by Howl and Sophie. 3 years since she'd been defeated and reformed. Time to see if anyone actually wants me here, or if they only tolerate me because they're afraid, she murmured. And if something else wakes up in the process, well, that's been sleeping far too long anyway. In the shadows behind her, something that wasn't quite shadow and wasn't quite substance rippled with what might have been amusement, or perhaps hunger. In the town below, flowers hummed, magic stirred, and deep beneath the old castle ruins, something that had been dreaming for 3 centuries began to sense that its loneliness might finally be ending. The party, it seemed, was going to be even more interesting than anyone imagined. Chapter 2, in which preparations go predictably wrong. Sophie had learned over the course of her marriage to Howl that there were several distinct types of disasters. There were the small, everyday disasters. Howl using all the hot water, Morgan, their 3-year-old son, discovering that crayons worked wonderfully on Calcifer's logs, or the castle deciding to rearrange its rooms while she was trying to find the bathroom. These she could handle. Then there were the medium disasters, rival wizards showing up for dramatic confrontations during dinner, accidentally insulting visiting royalty, or Howl's various beauty products achieving sentience and declaring war on each other. These required more effort, but were manageable with enough tea and determination. But the preparation for the Witch of the Waste's party was shaping up to be what Sophie privately called a Category Howl disaster, the kind where multiple impossible things went wrong simultaneously, while Howl made everything worse by trying to be helpful. It started Friday morning, when Sophie came downstairs to find the castle's main room transformed into what appeared to be a textile explosion. Fabric in every conceivable color and texture draped from the ceiling, covered the furniture, and formed small mountains on the floor. In the center of this chaos sat Howl, surrounded by at least 17 different costume sketches, while Michael, now a young man of 19 and officially Howl's apprentice, stood nearby wearing what looked like half a dragon costume and an expression of deep regret. "Sophie!" Howl exclaimed, leaping up with such enthusiasm that several sketches went flying. "Perfect timing. I need you to decide between these 43 costume options I've designed for you." 43, Sophie repeated flatly. Howl, the party is tomorrow night. Exactly why we need to decide quickly. I've already narrowed it down from 97. He began gathering sketches with manic energy. Now, I'm leaning toward the Autumn Queen concept. See, with real falling leaves enchanted to constantly spiral around you. But Michael thinks the Starlight Sorceress would better complement my costume. Which is... I haven't decided yet. That's why I need to know yours first. It's all about the dramatic contrast, you see. Sophie looked at Michael, who mouthed, "Help me," from behind Howl's back. Half of his dragon costume appeared to be slowly constricting around his middle. "Howl," Sophie said carefully. "Why is Michael being eaten by his costume?" "It's not eating him. It's establishing dominance. Dragon costumes need to know who's in charge." Howl waved dismissively. "Michael, stop looking so worried. If it actually starts digesting you, Calcifer will burn it off." "Very reassuring," Michael wheezed. Sophie stepped over a pile of what appeared to be animated silk scarves and rescued Michael with a pair of scissors and a stern look at the dragon fabric, which slunk away to sulk under the table. "Perhaps," she suggested, "we should focus on costumes that won't try to consume the wearer." "Where's the artistry in that?" But Howl began sorting his sketches into two piles, probably safe and definitely lethal. The second pile was considerably larger. The doorbell rang, or rather, played a funeral dirge, which meant Howl had been tinkering with it again. Sophie went to answer it, grateful for the excuse to escape the costume discussion, only to find her sister Letty on the doorstep holding a carta basket and looking frazzled. "Sophie, thank goodness. I need to hide here for a few hours." Letty pushed past her and into the castle. "Ben's turned our entire house into a practice run for tomorrow night's protective wards, and now we can't get into the bedroom because it thinks we're hostile spirits." Ben Sullivan, Letty's husband and the royal wizard, a position he'd inherited when Mrs. Penstemon finally retired, had a tendency to overdo protective magic. Sophie wasn't surprised. "Let me guess," Sophie said. "He's worried about the witches' party too." "Worried?" "He's convinced she's planning to steal everyone's souls and use them to redecorate her cottage." Letty set down her basket in the only clear spot on the floor. "I brought stress baking. There are apple turnovers in there somewhere, unless the protection spell on the basket has turned them into something else." They were interrupted by a loud crash from upstairs, followed by Morgan's delighted shriek of, "Calcifer made the bathroom purple." "I did not." Calcifer's voice roared down the stairs. "The bathroom made itself purple. I was just watching." Sophie sighed and headed for the stairs, but Howl caught her arm. "While you're up there, could you look at the costume I've laid out on our bed? The one with the peacock feathers and the constellation map?" "Howl, I am not wearing peacock feathers to this party. They're ethically sourced. The peacock donated them willingly." "No peacock donates feathers willingly. They're too vain." "Exactly my point. This one must have really believed in the autistic vision." Before Sophie could respond, the front door banged open again, and the Witch of the Waste herself swept in, or rather, a much younger, much more glamorous version of the Witch of the Waste swept in. She looked about 25, with elaborate red curls, and a dress that seemed to be made entirely of autumn fog. "I knew it." Howl pointed at her accusingly. You're planning something wicked. You only make yourself young when you're planning something wicked. Howl, darling, I'm always planning something wicked. It's good for the complexion. The witch settled herself on the least fabric-covered chair and helped herself to one of Letty's turnovers, which had indeed turned into something else. They appeared to be tiny apple phoenixes that burst into cinnamon-scented flames when bitten. Stress baking. Someone's worried about my little party. Your little party in cursed ruins with mandatory attendance? Sophie said, coming back downstairs with Morgan, whose hair was now the same purple as the bathroom. Yes, we're concerned. Oh, the ruins aren't cursed anymore. Well, not very cursed. Mostly just Tuesday cursed. The witch examined her perfectly manicured nails. I simply thought it would be nice to have a proper All Hallows' Eve celebration. You know, like the old days. The old days when you turned people into dogs and tried to steal Howl's heart, Michael asked, finally free from his dragon costume. I was going through a phase. The witch waved dismissively. This is different. This is about community building. Calcifer flickered skeptically from his grate. Community building. Right. That's why you sent magically compelling invitations that threaten transformation if people don't attend. I never threatened anything. I merely suggested that attendance was mandatory. People drew their own conclusions. She stood, her fog dress swirling dramatically. I just wanted to ensure good turnout. You know how people are. They say they'll come, and then suddenly they have to wash their hair, or decurse their gardens, or whatever excuse they invent. Those are legitimate activities, Sophie protested. Not on All Hallows' Eve, they're not. The witch moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, Howl, do wear something with color. You look like death in black, and not in the attractive way. She swept out, leaving behind the lingering scent of wood smoke and roses. She's definitely planning something, Howl said immediately. Obviously, Sophie agreed. But what? Before anyone could speculate, there was another crash from upstairs, and purple water began dripping through the ceiling. Calcifer, Sophie shouted. Still not my fault, Calcifer shouted back. The rest of Friday passed in a blur of magical mishaps. Howl went through 17 different hair colors trying to find the perfect shade for his costume, which he still hadn't decided on. Michael accidentally enchanted all the fabric in the house to develop opinions about fashion, leading to a heated argument between a bolt of velvet, burgundy is so last century, and a pile of silk, at least I'm not dusty. Morgan discovered that the purple from his hair was transferable, and decorated the cat, 2 walls, and most of the kitchen dishes before Sophie caught him. By evening, Sophie had given up on making sense of anything, and was sitting in her flower shop arranging chrysanthemums, which were thankfully non-magical and non-opinionated, when Ben Sullivan arrived, looking harried. Sophie, I need your help. Letty says you're the only sensible one in your family. That's a low bar, but continue. The king wants me to attend the witch's party tomorrow to keep an eye on things. Ben made air quotes with obvious distress. But he also wants me to ensure nothing goes catastrophically wrong. How am I supposed to do both? If I'm watching for catastrophe, I can't prevent it, and if I'm preventing it, I can't watch for it. Sophie considered this. Ben had a point. The witch's party was likely to be chaos, even without any nefarious plans. Adding nervous royal oversight would only make things worse. What you need, she said slowly, Is someone else to watch while you prevent, or prevent while you watch? But who? Everyone's been invited as guests. An idea formed in Sophie's mind. It was either brilliant or terrible, but in her experience, those were often the same thing when dealing with magical problems. Ben, how do you feel about coordinating costumes? Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth and a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to be sunny or ominous. So it settled for both, with patches of brilliant blue interrupted by clouds shaped like disturbing things. Sophie woke to find Howl already up and surrounded by what appeared to be every mirror in the castle, all reflecting different potential costumes. I've narrowed it down to 3, he announced, without looking at her. The Nightmare King, the Star-Touched Sorcerer, or the Autumn Phoenix. All of those sound like they'll take 12 hours to put on. 14 for the Phoenix, actually. The feathers have to be attached individually while still burning. Sophie got out of bed and noticed a carefully wrapped package on her dresser. What's this? Your costume. I decided for you since you were being indecisive. I wasn't being indecisive. I was being sensible. Same thing, really. Howl was now examining his reflection as the Nightmare King, complete with a crown that seemed to be made of crystallized screams. Too much? Sophie unwrapped the package carefully, expecting something outrageous. Instead, she found a dress of deep midnight blue that shifted to silver when it moved, like looking at the night sky reflected in water. It was elegant, practical enough to move in, and absolutely beautiful. Small stars were embroidered across the fabric in thread that actually glowed with soft light. Howl, it's perfect. Of course it is. I made it. But he was smiling, the real smile, not the one he wore for dramatic effect. You're the moon's shadow. I'll be the sun's echo, all gold and flame and beautiful tragedy. We'll be a matched set without being nauseating about it. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said that didn't involve your hair. My hair is very romantic, thank you. The afternoon was spent in final preparations. Michael had settled on being a wizard's apprentice who'd had a spell go wrong. Half of him looked normal. The other half appeared to be made of stars. It was actually quite clever, though he had to be careful not to bump into things with his star side, as it tended to leave sparkles everywhere. Morgan had insisted on being a scary dragon, which in practice meant Sophie had sewn felt wings to his favorite jumper and painted his face green. He spent most of the afternoon roaring at Calcifer, who obligingly pretended to be frightened. Letty arrived at 6, dressed as a harvest goddess, with real wheat woven into her hair and a dress that seemed to be made of solidified sunlight. Ben was with her, looking uncomfortable in his costume as the spirit of magical law, which involved a lot of official-looking robes covered in moving text from various legal documents. I still think this is a terrible idea, Ben muttered. It's Sophie's plan, Letty said. Her plans usually work out. Usually, Sophie emphasized, not always. As the sun set, they prepared to leave. The castle would walk them to the ruins. It had been practicing its formal walk all day, much to the confusion of the neighbors who'd watched it high-step past their windows. Everyone ready? Howl asked, resplendent in gold and copper with his hair a shade of flame that actually flickered. He'd managed to make himself look like a sunset, personified, all warm light and dying beauty. As ready as we can be for whatever disaster is about to unfold, Sophie said, smoothing her star-touched dress. That's the spirit. Howl offered her his arm. Shall we go see what fresh chaos the witch has prepared for us? The castle began its journey toward the ruins, its chicken legs moving with unusual dignity. Through the windows, Sophie could see other costumed figures making their way through the streets. Witches and wizards, ordinary townspeople, and even what appeared to be Mrs. Penstemon's cat, wearing a small pointed hat. The old castle ruins stood on a hill overlooking Market Chipping, remnants of some long-ago magical battle. On normal nights, they were forbidding and dark. Tonight, they glowed with orange and purple light, and Sophie could hear music drifting down, not entirely unpleasant music, but the kind that made you want to check that your soul was still firmly attached. Remember, Sophie said quietly to their group, Ben watches for magical irregularities. Michael, you're on crowd control if people panic. Letty, you're watching the food and drink for curses. Howl, I'm on witch duty. Keep her talking, find out what she's planning, and look fabulous while doing it. And I'm coordinating everyone while pretending to just be enjoying the party, Sophie finished. What about me? Morgan asked from Howl's shoulders. You're on very important dragon duty. If you see anything scary, you roar really loud to warn us. Morgan nodded solemnly, then practiced his roar. As they approached the ruins' entrance, which had been decorated with floating jack-o'-lanterns that watched guests with flickering eyes, Sophie noticed that quite a crowd had already gathered. The mayor was there, dressed as a fountain, showing admirable self-deprecation, along with most of the town council, various magical practitioners, and even some of the talking animals from the surrounding forests. The Witch of the Waste stood at the entrance, still young and beautiful, wearing a dress that seemed to be made of midnight and moonbeams. She smiled as she saw them approach. Howl, Sophie, how delightful, and you've brought the whole family. Her eyes lingered on Calcifer, who was hovering near Sophie's shoulder in a portable grate. Fire demon, how lovely to see you mobile. Witch, Calcifer said warily. You're looking very temporary. She laughed, a sound like silver bells with slightly sinister overtones. Aren't we all, really? Do come in. The festivities are about to begin. They entered the ruins, which had been transformed into something from a fever dream. The broken walls were draped with fabric that showed moving scenes of other All Hallows' Eves throughout history. Tables groaned under the weight of food that glowed, sparkled, or occasionally tried to escape. A string quartet made up of animated skeletons played in one corner, their music beautiful and deeply unsettling. Right, Sophie said quietly. Everyone remember their jobs. And whatever you do, don't... But she never got to finish her warning. At that moment, the clock, where had a clock come from in ruins, struck 8, and everything changed. The lights dimmed to a ghostly glow. The music shifted to a minor key, and the Witch of the Waste raised her arms with a smile that made Sophie's stomach drop. Welcome, everyone, to my All Hallows' Eve celebration. Tonight, we're going to play a game, a very old game, a very dangerous game. Her smile widened. Tonight, we're going to play Truth or Transformation. The gates to the ruins slammed shut with a definitive clang. Oh, botheration, Sophie muttered. Howl, naturally, just grinned. Finally, things are getting interesting. Thanks for spending some time with me tonight. I hope I helped you unwind and drift a little closer to sleep. If you're enjoying these readings, there's a whole library of full books and cozy chapters waiting for you over on my Patreon. If you are already a member, then I thank you. It includes exclusive content, bonus episodes, and early access to new releases. You can also become a YouTube member if you haven't already, to listen ad-free and explore hundreds of other relaxing readings anytime you like. I'd love to have you there. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next one.